Hi, this is Dr. Bhavna Pandey, Assistant Professor from School of Management, BBD University. My today's lecture is titled Aligning HR Strategy to Business Strategy. Okay, so let's see how HR strategy is linked with the organization strategy. Now, there is a growing concern that human resource planning is preoccupied with resource supply and demand forecasting, and it is not giving due consideration to the different HR practices that are required for different strategies. Now, for example, like it is given here, a company that decides to grow through development of international businesses has different personnel requirements than a company that decides to grow through mergers and acquisitions. So there are two different strategies that you can see. The aim is same. Both the organizations, they have the growth strategy in mind, but they are adopting different strategy in order to grow and expand. Now, one organization is thinking of growing by setting businesses overseas, whereas the other organization is thinking of growing through mergers and acquisitions. Now, in both the cases, the HR practices would be different. In the first case, that is through international businesses, the HR practice would be more based on finding out to develop a staffing strategy that would focus more on whether the business should hire someone from the foreign land, or should they get someone from their own home country. Whereas in the second case, the company has to decide which roles are being duplicated and how to reallocate people, or would they be requiring to lay off certain people. So there are two different strategies, and in both the cases, there would be different HR practices to be followed here. So that means HRM strategy has to be aligned with the business strategy. So what is HRM strategy, or what is a strategic HRM? It is a set of distinct but interrelated practices, policies, and philosophies whose goal is to enable the achievement of the organizational strategy. So HRM strategy is that is the HR practices, policies, and philosophies of the organizations. All these three are interrelated, and they all enable the achievement of the enable in achieving the organization's strategy. So HR practices is like, for example, your recruitment function, selection, performance appraisal, and so on. HR policies, they enable the development of HR practices, and HR philosophies, they define values on which the HR practices and policies will rest upon. Now, though it is realized that HR strategy should be aligned with the business strategy in order to succeed, but there is no one consent as to how to go about it. So generally there are three ways in which HR strategy can be aligned with the business strategy. First is either the organization strategy is developed first, and then from there follows the HR strategy. Second is that the HR competencies are taken into consideration, means what kind of competencies are there in the human resources of the organization, and depending on that the organization strategy is based. And third is the combination of both. So first is that first you start with the organization strategy and then create HR strategy. So this is a traditional perspective, and it determines that the HR strategy or human resources can be adapted to the business strategy. So it focuses more on developing the corporate strategy first, and then HRM strategy follows from the corporate strategy. So Secondly, personal needs are based on corporate plans. For example, if corporate strategy is low cost provider, it follows the low cost provider strategy. Then HR strategy is to hire cheap labor, including low wages and fringe benefits, etc. Now, this approach assumes that people are means to an end and not part of the strategy formulation. So here the HR capabilities or the HR personnel, they are not included in formulating the overall or the corporate strategy. In the second view, that another competing view states, the second either you start with the HR competencies first and then craft the corporate strategy based on those competencies of human resources. So this view states that organization cannot implement strategy if it does not have the human resources necessary. So this view, it is dependent on the skills determined strategy. That is, it depends heavily on employees' capabilities and not enough on environmental analysis. Nor the consideration is given to changing HR practices and training or compensation to facilitate this change in a strategy. According to this view, the organization should first view the HR human resource capabilities in the organization, and based on that they should craft their corporate strategy. Now again, this is also a very distorted view, and it is heavily dependent on the employee's capability and not taking environmental conditions into consideration. Now the third is a combination of both. So this is this is the emerging perspective and is largely followed by organizations. Now here it is vice versa. So HR strategy and the business strategy both are functioning together, and it is a reciprocal interdependence. So the key point here is the concept of concurrent strategy formulation. Now, this strategy is based on environmental analysis and is conducted at the same time that HRM issues are also considered. Now, so HR becomes the business partner here, and as such, HR managers in this approach, they will have to understand the nuances of doing business, and they should be able to understand the language of numbers. And in this two-way approach, HR should engage in scanning human resource capabilities for business opportunities. And for that, cost benefit assessment of options again also will have to be prepared and defended by HR. Now, for example, the low cost strategy of the organization depends on hiring people at low wages, and HR should be ready to develop strategies to deal with rapid training and high turnover rate. Now, any organization that follows a low cost provider strategy, so they depend heavily on training those employees, but again, high cost of training plus high rate of turnover is also seen in these organizations. So the HR should be ready with this. And again, they will have to weigh other options also, like should they be going for outsourcing their function instead of hiring people, or should they be using more of automation, or they can also increase wages to reduce the cost of turnover. So this way, now in this view, in this emerging perspective, it's a combination of both. Means again, the HR strategy and the business strategy, they are being devised, or they are being formulated keeping in mind the issues on both the sides. Now, there are different ways in which HR can become involved in the strategic planning process. So, first is the membership in the executive team. Now, this means that HR can become part of the executive team that is involved in formulating corporate strategy, and any HR personnel can be part of the executive team, and he can be in a position of a vice president or so on. Then secondly, review react linkage. Now in this, the either the corporate strategy is formulated and the HR personnel will review it and maybe modify it and give his inputs. And thirdly is the integrative linkage, that is the interaction between the executive team and the HR personnel is more frequent, and the strategy is formulated in the presence of both, that is the HR personnel and the executive team. Now, measuring the effectiveness of HR strategy. Now, there are different characteristics of effective HR strategy. Now, an effective HR strategy first should have external fit. Now, what do we mean by external fit? That means the HR strategy must align with the overall strategy of the organization. Right? So HR strategy is aligned with the overall strategy of the organization. Secondly, the internal fit. Now there are two types of internal fit. First, it should fit with other functional areas like marketing, finance, and so on. For example, let's say that the marketing strategy is advertising that they would give 24 into 7 customer service. So in that case, the HR strategy should be to compensate it should devise a compensation differential for shift workers. And then secondly, internal fit is that the HR strategy should also fit among all HR programs. So the HR strategy, like for example, if the training department is thinking of training people in developing their proficiency in using the internet. So the staffing department should hire people who have some kind of computer proficiency, or they have that kind of intelligence for grasping whatever is being taught or trained to them. So external fit is there and internal fit is there. And third characteristic of an effective HR strategy is that it should have some kind of measures so that it can measure performance. It should have some standards, some performance measures to see whether the HR strategy is effective or not. Now, there are different reasons as to why HRM effectiveness should be measured. Now, firstly, anything that is measured leads to improvement and better performance. So, HRM effectiveness also should be measured. Otherwise, if it is not evaluated, then nobody would know what HR practices are effective and which are not. And so first is labor costs are controllable. Now labor expense is always highest in any organization, and any HR strategy that aims at controlling the cost of labor will show, or it will display how effective or not it is. So if HRM practices they are effective, then it should lead to low cost or cost minimization. Secondly, organizations should comply with laws. Again, there are some legal laws that organizations have to follow, and it is very necessary that any organization is operating keeping in laws of the country where they are operating. So again, HR has to keep up with this. Then thirdly, as I said, evaluations are needed to understand which HR practices are effective. Then measuring will also result in continuous improvement. Obviously, when you know which practices are effective and which are not, you can modify and you can make changes in it, and you can eliminate any kind of wastage or ineffectiveness you can remove. Then audit also brings HR closer to line functions of the organization. Now, again, audit, when you're auditing the HR practices and policies, then you have to work, the HR department has to work closely with the line managers, and that brings them closer. Otherwise, in many organizations or many a times it is seen that the two functions or they are not working together. The line managers and the HR departments are not working together, and which leads to very uncoordinated activities. So this again helps them to come together and see whether the the organization's objectives are being achieved or not. Then data will be available to support resource allocation. Of course, when you are measuring the HRM effectiveness, and then you are collecting data, analyzing that data, and that data will enable the HR to allocate resources in the right way. Now, the 5C model of HRM impacts. Now, there are numerous areas that are judged for measuring the effectiveness of the HR function, but here they are grouped into 5 clusters, the 5 C's. So, the 5 areas which help you to judge the effectiveness of the HR functions are: first is compliance. Now, compliance, as I said, there are legal laws, and the organization has to function in a way that it follows the laws in whichever country it is operating. So, if there are any, if the company does not comply with the laws or with the regulatory framework, then it can get into trouble. And there are organizations that have been fined and they are facing legal suit. And it also damages their reputation. So compliance is one area where the effectiveness of the HR function can be judged. So if the organization is getting into penalties due to violation of norms, then that means it has to relook into its HR functions. Second is client satisfaction. Now, there are external clients as well as there are internal clients. So, external clients may be suppliers or the recruiting companies and so on. So, and the internal clients can be your customers, employees, and the other staff members. So, again, how satisfied are they? Their feedback can be taken to see, to judge how the effectiveness of the HR performance. Third is culture management. Now, how are people, what is the attitude of the employees, the people of the organization towards the different programs that are running in the organization? So, your attitude survey can be taken, and that is how you can understand how employees feel towards the climate or culture of the organization. Then fourth area is cost control. Now HR practices, again, they can be effective if they manage to reduce labor costs. Either they can do it by increasing the efficiency and productivity of people, or by using more of technology, or by reducing behaviors like neglecting work, or being absent from work, or doing frequent accidents. So that is how the labor cost can be controlled. Then the last area is contribution. Now, unless HR it contributes towards increasing sales or profits, or in decreasing turnover rate, or in increasing the knowledge, skills, and abilities of the firm, it will always be seen as an extra burden on the organization's budget. So, HR to be effective, it has to contribute towards the bottom line of the organization. Now, there are different approaches to measuring HRM practices. First is activity-based measures. Now, that means there are a number of activities that take place, like, for example, the number of people who are completing training, then the number of people that were hired, actually hired. So, you may your recruitment may have been able to attract a lot of people, but how many people were actually hired, actually selected. So these kind of activities again would give an idea as to how the HR practices are faring. Then secondly, client satisfaction that we have already talked about. Again, how are the internal and external clients thinking about the HR functions? Uh, for example, did the manager solve the problem? Like if there is any complaint, was it resolved peacefully and in time, and so on. Then the cost benefit analysis is another approach, that is, for example, if training was given at a cost, then what was the benefit out of it? So cost and benefit analysis again can be done to measure the HR practices. And next is utility analysis. That is, it's a method of determining the gain or loss to the organization that results from different courses of action. Now, for example, would program A provide a better return than program B? Like, for example, if you have to motivate the employees, so would it be better to go for some leadership kind of training, or would it be better to go for pay for performance? So, utility analysis helps to determine which where the results would accrue. Then another is auditing. So this can be done annually or quarterly so that changes can be done before posing any surprises. For example, if attitude survey shows less satisfaction, then remedial actions can be taken. So auditing again will help you understand where the problem may arise in future. And lastly, by benchmarking, that is comparing it with other units or comparing the results with some outside organizations that follow good practices. So benchmarking again can be made to improve operations in the organization. For example, how are others doing on cost per hire? Like for example, the other company, what is their cost of hire? Then how much time do they take to process their applicants? Then number of acceptance or rejections, means how many people do they actually hire and how many do they reject. So all this again will give an idea as to how the HR practices are doing. Are they effective or not? Now there are certain challenges in measuring the impact of HR practices or human resource management practices. First is universality of best practices. Now there is no one uh, sure way of doing something. So there is no single best practice that works in every situation, as businesses have different strategic goals. So the idea is that the HRM practices, this should be measured against unit goals and not on on the overall general measures like profits or growth, because different businesses, they have different goals and different strategies. So the HRM impact should be measured against those goals, those unit goals. Then secondly, separation of cause and effect. Now there is lack of confidence in the explanation of causal links between specific HRM practices and organizational performance. That means you cannot say that because of variable A, this will sure be the outcome. Like for example, if if the company is reaping profits and if they plan to share bonus with employees, so it will increase the productivity of the employees. So there is no definite causal cause and effect link. So the conclusion here is that it is better that the culture of the organization is a better explanation here that may influence the employees' behavior more than any standard alone practices. And lastly is the attitude about measuring the impact of HRM. HR professionals, they themselves feel that it is a very time consuming activity to do this analysis, and it entails a lot of cost and money, and also like if it is the tendency if of the organization that if anything goes well then the credit goes to the other organization like the finance or the marketing department, and if anything goes wrong then it is the HR manager is blamed for it. So these are some of the challenges, and that is why the measurement part is somewhat not in the scene. The role of human resource planning is first is that the personal needs are taken care of. Now, as we have seen that human resource planning is it ensures that the organization has adequate number of people with adequate competencies and in the right time. So it ensures that people are there to achieve the organizational goals, and so in that way it is taking care of personnel. Then secondly, it is part of strategic planning. Again, we've seen that HRP, it ensures that ensures the development of HR strategies like your strategy for recruitment or maybe for training, performance, and so on. Then thirdly, it helps in creating highly talented personnel. Now, since it ensures that people are allocated and distributed in the right place in the right time, so it helps in the retention of good quality personnel, and so that way it helps in the retention of talented personnel. Then international strategies, now again HRP, it helps if the organization is going for international expansion, then HRP will help in meeting the staffing needs. Again, it will plan how the positions will be filled. Will they be filled from the personnel out from the foreign countries, or maybe it will be someone from the home country. So HRP again ensures that and helps in meeting the staffing needs during international expansions. Then it also serves as the foundation for other HR functions. So obviously, the other functions like recruitment selection cannot be undertaken unless the organization has an idea about what number of people it needs and what type of people it needs. Then again, HRP ensures that the organization makes investment in its human resources either through training or through suitable job assignments. Then it again helps in the transition of employees maybe to a different job or to a different location, because as again we had discussed that HRP, it engages in succession planning and helps in leadership development. So it ensures that people they do not resist to any kind of change when the need arises. So it avoids that transition problem. And again, it unites the perspective of line and staff managers. So again, if anything has if the strategy has to be executed, then it is always that the HR department alone cannot do it. It has to work in tandem with the line manager, because after all, it is the line manager that will execute the strategy. So, for example, if there is anything, if there's some strategy related to your performance appraisal, then both the HR personnel and the line manager has to work together. So in that way, it unites the perspective of line and staff both. And lastly, there are other benefits like the personal cost may be less as the managers can anticipate imbalances before they become unmanageable. So HRP ensures that the organization will have vacancies in a certain time period, and so the organization can be prepared for that. And lastly, there are better opportunities to include minority groups. Again, HRP ensures that all sections of the population get a chance to grow and be included in the workforce. Thank you.